The massive, three-phase commercial breaker panel was generating a distinct, low-frequency hum that vibrated directly through the thick rubber soles of my work boots. It was 1,800 hours on a Friday. I was standing in the chaotic, half-finished interior of a new commercial catering kitchen, holding a high-voltage Fluke multimeter. My name is Kameron Nelson. I am 29 years old, and I am an industrial electrician. I do not design sleek software applications, and I do not manage corporate hedge funds. I pull heavy copper wire through rigid steel conduit, I calculate severe phase loads, and I ensure that high voltage does not burn commercial buildings to the ground. It is an entirely ordinary, necessary existence. I clamped my insulated lineman pliers onto the thick, black neutral wire, securing the final mechanical connection for the massive walk-in freezer unit, and forcefully flipped the primary switch. The heavy industrial compressor kicked on instantly with a deep mechanical groan, the digital temperature gauge on the exterior door glowing a steady, reliable red. I wiped the accumulated sweat from my forehead with the rough back of my canvas work glove and began methodically packing my tools into my heavy canvas bag. Before I could pull the heavy brass zipper closed, the reinforced steel door of the kitchen was thrown open with frantic, completely uncontrolled force. Samantha Myers stood in the doorway. She was 34 years old. She was the sole proprietor of this new, high-end catering facility, and, coincidentally, my direct neighbor in the aging brick apartment building exactly 3 blocks away. I knew this specific piece of data because the shared hallway outside our doors perpetually smelled of toasted vanilla, high-grade espresso, and severe, unmitigated stress. She was currently covered in a fine, powdery dusting of white pastry flour, her dark hair pulled into a messy, chaotic bun that was actively unspooling. She was holding a heavy stainless steel mixing bowl against her left hip like a defensive shield. "Cameron," she gasped, her eyes darting frantically around the dim kitchen before locking definitively onto my leather tool belt. "Did you just test the main power drop?" My entire prep line just went completely dark. I have 3 massive corporate event orders due by tomorrow morning for the soft launch. If those primary convection ovens stay off for more than 20 minutes, the internal temperature drops, the batter falls flat, and I lose $8,000 in non-refundable deposits. I looked down at her from my position near the panel. I do not possess a natural, charming wit to casually diffuse tension. I rely on structural facts. The primary feed lug inside your commercial sub-panel failed, I explained plainly, my voice a flat, tired gravel. The connection was severely corroded. It was actively arcing behind the metal dead front. If I didn't cut the localized circuit at the panel immediately, the resulting thermal event would have engaged the building's overhead fire suppression system. Your entire kitchen would have been thoroughly soaked. Samantha slumped heavily against the steel doorframe. The frantic, panicked energy left her entirely, instantly replaced by a sudden, crushing physical despair. "Okay. You're right. You kept the building from burning down. Thank you. But how long until the power comes back on?" "The property management company will not dispatch a municipal repair crew until Monday morning," I told her, delivering the honest, highly unpleasant truth without attempting to sugarcoat the logistics. "It costs triple time for a weekend emergency call out here in the industrial district. They won't authorize the expense." "Monday," she whispered, her voice cracking audibly. She stared blindly at the gray concrete floor. "I have to formally refund the launch deposits. I can't afford that right now. My commercial business insurance premium just doubled. I'm financially ruined before I even open the doors." I looked at the exposed, burnt wire casing hanging from the open panel. I looked at the white flour on her pale face and the sheer, overwhelming exhaustion dragging down her posture. I am an ordinary man, but I have a highly specialized skill set, and I know exactly how copper conductivity works. "The main power to your unit isn't completely dead," I stated, dropping my tool bag back onto the floor with a heavy thud. Only the dedicated 220-volt circuit serving the prep line was tripped by the voltage spike when the lug arced. Samantha looked up quickly, a fragile, desperate spark of hope appearing in her dark eyes. "Can you turn it back on? I can safely bypass the damaged relay and temporarily route the 220-volt load through a secondary auxiliary breaker on your primary panel," I offered, pulling my heavy tool belt back onto my shoulder. "It is a temporary, emergency stabilization, but it will keep your ovens hot until Monday morning when the permanent part arrives." "Do it," she said immediately, stepping back to grant me clear physical access to the panel. "Please." Her new kitchen was currently a beautiful, highly stressful disaster of stainless steel prep tables, massive 50-pound bags of specialized flour, and heavy, industrial stand mixers waiting to be wired. I walked directly back to the gray metal breaker box mounted on the far concrete wall. I did not offer false, empty reassurances. I simply executed the work. I stripped off my thick insulated gloves, pulled my specialized voltage meter from my leather pouch, and verified the line was dead. I carefully identified the tripped breaker, disconnected the heavy gauge, burnt wire, stripped it back to clean copper, and meticulously rerouted it to a spare, functioning 50-amp switch. It required extreme precision and a solid, mathematical understanding of phase balancing to prevent overloading the bus bar. Clear the immediate area, I instructed, keeping my voice calm and completely level. Samantha stepped back quickly. I flipped the heavy black switch. The massive commercial ovens against the far wall hummed to life instantly, their internal circulation fans engaging with a loud, mechanical whir. The digital temperature displays flared a bright, steady red. Samantha let out a loud, sudden breath that sounded dangerously close to a suppressed sob. She walked quickly over to the ovens, resting her hands flat against the warm, vibrating stainless steel doors. "You saved my launch," she said softly, turning to look at me, the profound relief clearly evident in her posture. "I don't know how to properly thank you. I don't have much liquid cash on hand right now, because every dime is tied up in the commercial lease, but I can write you a check on Monday." "I don't need a check," I replied, packing my voltage meter safely back into my pouch. I felt intensely awkward standing in her space, acutely aware of my dirty canvas work clothes and grease-stained hands. It took exactly 4 minutes. "Just ensure the building manager calls a licensed municipal crew on Monday to replace the primary relay." I turned to leave. As I reached the heavy exit door, it swung open violently before my hand could touch the handle. A woman burst into the kitchen, carrying 3 massive, overflowing paper shopping bags. She looked physically similar to Samantha, but her internal energy was entirely different. It was loud, chaotic, and completely overwhelming. This was Clara, Samantha's younger sister. "Sammy, I have the extra fondant, the edible gold leaf, and—" Clara stopped dead in her tracks, staring directly at me. She looked at my heavy tool belt, then looked at Samantha, a massive, utterly delighted grin spreading across her face. "Oh my God. You actually did it." Samantha frowned deeply, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. "Did what, Clara?" "I knew you were incredibly stressed about the launch, and you've been so lonely since the bad breakup," Clara announced loudly, dropping the heavy bags onto a stainless prep table with a loud clatter. "So, I went on that new neighborhood networking app. I saw Cameron's profile. It said he was a local guy and good with his hands. So, I hired him for the launch party. Happy early birthday, Sammy. I got you a capable companion for the weekend to help you survive this baking marathon." The silence in the industrial kitchen became absolute, heavy, and completely suffocating. Samantha stared at her younger sister in sheer, unadulterated horror. I stared at the concrete floor, the back of my neck burning with an intense, humiliating heat. Clara hadn't hired me for my industrial electrical skills. She had completely, disastrously misread my basic, highly practical profile on the neighborhood service app, assuming good with his hands was a sleazy, suggestive euphemism rather than a literal, professional description of my blue-collar trade. She thought she had literally hired an escort. "Clara?" Samantha hissed, her face turning a violent, mortified shade of red. "Cameron is my neighbor. He lives across the hall from my apartment. He is an industrial electrician. He just fixed the broken ovens so we don't go bankrupt. He is not a birthday gift." Clara's delighted grin vanished entirely, instantly replaced by absolute, crushing mortification. "Oh no. Oh, I am so incredibly sorry." The service app was glitching. The categories were all mixed up, and I just saw his picture and thought, "I need to leave." I stated bluntly, my voice a rough, tight gravel. I did not look at either of them. I could not handle the sheer, awkward weight of the massive misunderstanding. I felt entirely inadequate. A crude iron wrench dropped into a room meant for delicate pastry. I pushed past Clara, walked quickly out of the kitchen, and stepped into the cool evening air. I walked the 3 blocks back to our apartment building, unlocked my own door, and shut it firmly behind me. I leaned heavily against the cheap wood, closing my eyes. I fix tangible things. I do not get hired as romantic gifts. 2 hours later, at 2000 hours, a quiet, hesitant knock sounded at my apartment door. I opened it. Samantha was standing in the narrow hallway. The white flour was completely wiped from her face, and she had taken her messy apron off. She was holding a small, perfectly constructed, dark chocolate tart on a simple white ceramic plate. I am incredibly, profoundly sorry about my sister, Samantha said, her voice soft, maintaining direct eye contact even though she clearly, desperately wanted to look away in embarrassment. She lacks any sort of filter. I completely understand if you never want to speak to me again. I looked at the delicate tart, then looked at her exhausted face. I am an electrician, I said, ensuring the boundary was absolute and perfectly clear. I fix wiring. I know, she smiled, a small, genuine expression breaking through the fatigue. You fixed it perfectly today. I wanted to bring you this. She held out the plate. I took it. Our fingers didn't brush. It was a careful, strictly polite exchange. Thank you, I said. Good night, Kameron, she replied, turning back to her own apartment door. The awkward situation was stabilized. The social boundary was successfully reset. However, the localized threat environment shifted drastically less than 48 hours later. It was Sunday afternoon, exactly 3 hours before her official launch party. I was standing on my small, concrete apartment balcony, utilizing a stiff wire brush to clean the heavy corrosion off a set of old automotive battery terminals. The weather was gray, humid, and threatening rain. I heard the sharp, aggressively loud sound of a heavy fist pounding on a door. It wasn't my door. It was Samantha's. I set the wire brush down on the concrete and stepped back inside my apartment, leaving the sliding glass door open to the humid air. I walked to my front door and looked silently through the small, brass peephole. A man wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, holding a municipal clipboard, was standing directly outside 3B. I recognized him immediately. It was Vance, the senior municipal safety inspector for our specific industrial district. He was notorious among the local tradesmen for finding obscure, highly technical code violations and using them to aggressively extort cash expedition fees from vulnerable small business owners. Samantha opened her door. She looked utterly exhausted, clearly having baked straight through the entire weekend without a single hour of sleep. Miss Myers, Vance announced loudly, intentionally ensuring his harsh voice carried clearly down the narrow hall. I received an anonymous complaint regarding unauthorized, high-voltage electrical work being performed in your commercial unit. I am here to conduct an immediate, mandatory safety compliance audit. An audit? Samantha stammered, gripping the edge of her door, the panic instantly returning to her voice. The launch party starts in 3 hours. The building manager isn't even here. Safety violations do not observe the weekend, Miss Myers, Vance sneered, entirely lacking human empathy, pushing aggressively past her into the apartment without waiting for formal permission. I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. I did not yell. I did not engage in unnecessary theatrics or verbal grandstanding. I walked quietly across the hall and stepped directly into Samantha's kitchen. Vance was standing aggressively in front of the gray metal breaker box I had worked on. He had forcefully pulled the heavy metal cover off and was pointing his pen at the thick, black 220-volt wire I had specifically rerouted on Friday night. This is a catastrophic safety hazard, Vance dictated loudly to Samantha, who was physically shrinking back against her stainless prep table. You have an unpermitted, unlicensed, highly illegal bypass on a primary commercial oven circuit. This directly violates Municipal Code 402. B. I am officially issuing a red tag shutdown order. You must power down these ovens immediately, and you cannot operate your business in this unit until a certified master electrician pulls a formal permit and completely rewires the panel. I have 50 guests arriving for the launch in 3 hours, Samantha whispered, panic completely hijacking her voice, her hands trembling. If I turn the ovens off now, the final service fails. I'll lose the primary investors. I'll be sued for breach of contract. That is a civil matter. This is a life safety issue. Vance smiled, a slick, deeply predatory expression. However, I am administratively authorized to issue a temporary, 24-hour operational variance. It requires a mandatory, immediate administrative fee of $1,000, payable in cash, directly to me, right now. I don't have $1,000 in cash, she choked out. Then turn the ovens off, Vance commanded, crossing his arms. I stepped fully into the kitchen. My heavy work boots thudded definitively against the linoleum floor. I walked directly toward the breaker panel, intentionally placing my large body squarely between Vance and the electrical box, effectively cutting off his access. "The circuit is perfectly stable and mathematically sound," I stated, my voice a flat, unyielding baseline. Vance stepped back instinctively, visibly startled by my sudden, quiet appearance. He looked at my worn canvas jacket and heavily calloused hands. "Who are you?" "Step away from the panel. I am documenting this illegal bypass for a citation." He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, raising it to take a photograph of the open breaker box. I did not move. I maintained my position, completely blocking his camera angle with my chest. "I am Kameron Nelson. I am the industrial electrician who performed the bypass," I replied, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact. I did not try to sound like a smooth corporate lawyer. I sounded like exactly what I was, a working man who understood the physical reality of the situation. "You performed unpermitted work," Vance snapped, attempting to heavily leverage his municipal authority. "You're personally liable for this hazard." "It is not a hazard," I corrected, pointing a thick, grease-stained finger directly at the specific breaker. The primary feed lug inside the panel failed. It was actively arcing. I deliberately rerouted the necessary load to a dedicated 50-amp auxiliary breaker designed explicitly for heavy, sustained appliance loads. The wire gauge is correct. The electrical phase is perfectly balanced. The thermal output is well within the strict safety margins. It is a temporary, highly functional, physically safe emergency stabilization. "It doesn't have a stamped municipal permit," Vance shouted, his face flushing dark red as I calmly dismantled his technical argument. "That means it's illegal. And I am shutting her down." I reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out my worn leather wallet. I extracted a heavy, laminated plastic card and held it up so Vance could clearly read the bold, black lettering. "This is my state-issued journeyman electrical license," I stated quietly, absolutely refusing to raise my volume to match his. "It mandates that I am legally authorized, under the specific emergency provisions of Municipal Code 402C, to perform temporary, unpermitted stabilizing repairs to effectively prevent immediate thermal events inside a commercial unit. I have exactly 72 hours from the time of the repair to file the retroactive paperwork with the city." Vance stared hard at the license. His jaw worked silently. The false authority evaporated. "I am currently well within my legal operational window," I continued relentlessly, stepping a fraction of an inch closer to him, compressing his space. "Take the photo. Write the citation. If you attempt to extort Miss Myers for a cash variance on a legally protected emergency repair, I will attach my sworn affidavit regarding your demand for a $1,000 cash bribe directly to the formal appeal. I will personally file a documented grievance with the state licensing board tomorrow morning, citing your specific badge number. I will have your inspector certification permanently revoked." Vance looked at me, then looked at the humming commercial ovens. He realized his extortion tactic relied entirely on civilian ignorance, and he had just walked blindly into a room occupied by a licensed professional who knew the structural code significantly better than he did. "Fine," Vance spat, his voice cracking slightly, his posture breaking. He shoved his phone forcefully into his pocket. "You have until tomorrow at 1800 hours to file the retroactive permit in the system. If it's not in the digital portal, I'm red tagging the building." He turned on his heel and marched rapidly out of the apartment, slamming the door heavily behind him. The heavy, sweet-smelling air in the kitchen slowly settled. I put my license back into my wallet and shoved it into my pocket. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of adrenaline begin to rapidly recede, leaving me feeling awkward and entirely unpolished in her space. Samantha was staring at me. Her hands were covering her mouth. She slowly lowered them. "You completely shut him down," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet, profound awe. "I did not lie about the structural safety of the circuit," I clarified immediately, pushing the heavy metal cover back onto the panel and securing the latches, unwilling to let her think I was reckless with her life. "The wiring is physically perfect. It will not fail under load." "But you used the exact code against him," she deduced, her sharp intelligence connecting the dots, stepping closer to me. I looked down at the panel. "I know how bullies operate. They rely on people not knowing the structural rules. I just used the rules against him." "You risked your license for me," she said softly, stopping exactly 2 feet away, the gratitude clear in her eyes. If he actually reports you, the city could heavily fine you. I can pay a fine, I replied simply, shrugging my heavy shoulders. You can't replace a ruined business launch. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She reached out and lightly, intentionally touched my forearm. The physical contact was incredibly brief, but it sent a distinct, heavy shock through my highly regulated system. Thank you, Cameron, she said, her voice dropping. I have to go file the retroactive permit online, I noted, stepping back slightly to break the contact before I did something entirely clumsy. The municipal system is incredibly complicated. It will take me a few hours to navigate. I have the launch party at the new kitchen space tonight, she said, her eyes not leaving mine. My sister feels terrible about the app mistake. I know it's not your scene, but I would really like it if you came, as my actual guest, not a gift. As the man who saved my ovens, I looked at her. I am not a man who attends fancy corporate parties. But standing in her kitchen, having just secured her perimeter, the request felt entirely different. I don't own a tailored suit, I warned her truthfully. Wear whatever you want, she smiled. Just be there. At 2000 hours, I walked into the commercial kitchen space. It had been completely transformed. The stainless steel tables were covered in elegant, highly structured displays of food. The room was packed with people in expensive clothing holding wine glasses. I wore dark, clean denim jeans and a simple, dark button-down shirt. I felt profoundly out of place. An industrial component dropped into a delicate, highly calibrated mechanism. I stood near the back wall, holding a bottle of sparkling water, quietly observing the chaotic energy of the room. Samantha was entirely in her element, gracefully navigating the dense crowd, speaking rapidly to potential investors and local critics. She looked incredibly competent, radiant, and completely out of my league. I maintained my position as a silent, unmoving anchor in the room. At 2,130 hours, the crowd began to thin significantly. Samantha finally broke away from a group of regional distributors and walked directly toward me. She looked exhausted but undeniably triumphant. You stayed, she noted, leaning back against the massive stainless steel refrigerator next to me. I said I would be here, I replied simply. The ovens held perfectly, she said, her voice dropping the loud, performative tone she had been using with the guests. The launch was a massive success. The circuit was mathematically sound, I confirmed. She turned to face me, her back resting against the cold metal of the fridge. She looked up into my face, her dark eyes studying the rough lines of my jaw. The polished, unshakable entrepreneur persona fractured slightly, revealing the intense, visceral exhaustion she had been actively suppressing all night. My sister took a photo of us earlier, Samantha murmured, her voice incredibly soft. When you were standing by the door. I am not photogenic, I noted, stiffening slightly. It wasn't a posed photo, she clarified. It was just a shot of us talking, but she posted it on her social media. I felt a sudden spike of anxiety. Did she tag it with that ridiculous app description again? No. Samantha smiled, a slow, genuine expression that fundamentally altered the geometry of her face. She tagged it, the guy who actually fixed things. She stepped a fraction of an inch closer. She was entirely pinned between me and the massive refrigerator. The physical proximity was overwhelming. She pinned me against the fridge with her gaze and said, "You are remarkably reliable, Kameron Nelson." I looked down at her. I realized, with absolute clarity, that I didn't want to maintain the safe, isolated distance anymore. I didn't want to be unexceptional in her eyes. I reached out. I didn't hesitate. I gently brushed a stray smudge of white pastry flour off the shoulder of her dark dress. I said, "You missed a spot." Samantha let out a soft, surprised breath. She didn't pull away. She leaned into the microscopic touch. "I'm not as fine as I look," I admitted, my voice a rough, quiet rumble in the emptying room, stripping away the stoic armor I wore to survive the city. "I prefer men who are out of their element," she promised, reaching up and lightly touching the collar of my shirt. And then I got an invitation I couldn't explain. "What invitation?" I asked, my heart hammering a rapid rhythm against my ribs. "To stay and help me close down the kitchen," she whispered, her eyes locked fiercely onto mine. I looked at the fierce intelligence and the undeniable strength that defined her. I realized I didn't need to be perfectly smooth or socially flawless. I just needed to be real. I'm highly efficient at shutting systems down safely, I replied, leaning closer. The end.